Well, it's a long story. I've been in Newton County. I guess I'm probably we moved from Atlanta when I was about age 4, and I remember the move. And we we lived on a grandfather's farm out of Stewart Road in the Spring Hill, section of the Rocky Plain district. Anyway, we've been living there. My granddad had a farm. He had like 400 acres, I think it was, and he let his siblings have, part of the land. So all the land around there, he joined his. And we farmed that land up until I went into the Army. Let's put it that way, And went to school at the Rocky Plain. It was a schoolhouse there and the cemetery there at Rocky Plains. Went there, must have been, I don't know, might have gone there for a year. I remember going there. Then we moved up to, on 162, they built a schoolhouse there at Country Road, behind Country Road subdivision there. And went to school there, maybe a couple of years there. Then we went over to Livingston. We were transferred to Livingston. Over Livingston. We had to ride the bus over there. So then after that, then I, went to Washington Street School, and after that, history, I used to ride with my grandfather uptown on a mule and wagon, 2-horse mule and wagon. We would park the wagon and the mules in the back here behind the courthouse here, right? And I would help him go to different stores, the hardware store and around about, and I had a sack that, whatever he bought, I had to put it in the sack and carry it. And when we got ready to leave to go back home, he would always go down to Patrick's Feed and Seed, which is right over there, buy some cheese and some soda crackers, and that's where we'll eat going back on the mule and wagon. So it was a long little ride. Have no idea how long it would take to drive a 2-horse mule and wagon from here back to the farm. I experienced it. Even when we would come to uptown, there was a water fountain right out front there on the porch there, and it said white only. I don't remember where the color where the color one was at. It might have been over in the corner there. I don't know. I do know that the sheriff department used to be in the office where Miss Jackie's office. That was the sheriff department, at that time. But that was a grocery store, a little country store that we used to have to go to out in my area. It's over at where Rocky Plain Road crosses 162 in that area there. There was a store there, and we'd go in there sometime. Mother then would send us, to the store. And I mean, we were like a mile and a half away. We had to walk through the woods to get there. So we'd go in the store, and hey, that was, that might be a white fella, standing in the corner over there, not doing anything, just talking, and to the store owner, and I have to stand back and wait, my turn. Not only that at that store, but it was the same thing, here uptown in the grocery store. You have to just stand back and wait your turn, But I experienced all that. I was in the Army 3 years and 3 months in the Army. I went in October 1961, and I was discharged in January 65. I extended my time. That's why I had 3 years and 3 months. I did my basic training at Fort Gordon, and I did my AIT at Fort Gordon Signal Corps. So I was a Signal Corps specialist, and I left Fort Gordon and went to Camp Pickett to a strike outfit, and we had to be on call at all times. We was during the Cuban crisis. We were put on call, but we didn't have to go to Florida anything. But we were on call, and then they moved my unit down to Camp Pickett, Virginia, which was a relocation post for the Pentagon. And while I was there, all we had to do it was a deserted post, but they had all the amenities there for the Pentagon in case something went wrong. And we had to make sure that all the equipment was checked, and every week, and make sure everything was functional and so forth. So I worked in the communications center there at Camp Pickett, and that's where I got my orders to go to Vietnam. So I went to Vietnam. Was assigned to the 39th Signal Battalion, 232nd Signal Company in Benoit, and I was put in charge of a detachment unit, and our job was to relay messages from the troops in the field. And at that time there was no combat units there. There was nothing but advisors was there, and we would always receive messages from them if they needed help or whatever they needed. So it would only be 2 or 3 guys go out with a Vietnamese unit and so forth, but we had to make sure that they was taken care of and everything. I do. I think I was working at General Motors after I got out of service and everything, so I was working there, and we would. Well, anyway, it didn't really have too much to do with the school system at that time, because my kids wasn't old enough to go to school. So but do know about it. That good friend of mine, Forrest Sawyer, of course he's passed now, and I know he was instrumental in help desegregating the schools and so forth, and he and I were got to be real good friends, and everything. Well, when they began doing this, cleaning cemeteries, I think one of my large brothers, Kerry Belcher, had contacted me. They had cleaned off the cemetery at Gray's Chapel, and he had asked me, if I would, needed some wood, or help him haul the wood from there. So after that, they had did a marvelous job down there, and they did it on King's birthday, and of course they had to go back and do other work, stuff like that. So, but Forrest and I, he kept at me, and Kerry, kept at me, about the cemeteries and so forth. So anyway, we decided we go out and do that on King's birthday. So it's been an annual thing, except the last year we didn't go. And Laura Bertram, them with Hands on Newton, they usually furnish me kids and so forth, students to help me out, and of course we get volunteers from the community and sheriff department help us out, and anyway, we just however we can get it done. I just usually just go out and pinpoint a cemetery that I think need taken care of, or try to, and hoping that the families and descendants will continue that that stride. But we can only do so much. I mean, with volunteers. I had several people that have asked me, how about cleaning off our cemetery? So I'd go and look at it, and I said, well, part of it's already clean. I mean, it's manicured, or why can't they, just move back just a little bit further, and So I refuse to do, that type. I try to go to the ones that been neglected for years and years, and which we do have, many of them. There's a cemetery down on Henderson Mill Road, that old slave cemetery, and we've gone in there. I think Chief Ellis, he and I doing his administration. We went in there and trying to do some work there, but it's just too hard to do because you got trees, 3 foot in diameter in the graves, and I brought it to the commissioners, attention several years ago that really need to do something about that, and hopefully one day that that we wake up and take care of what need to be taken care of. And like I say, I tell my grandkids all the time, to try to learn as much as you can about your ancestry and stuff like that. I wished 1,000 times I would have asked more questions. All it would took just a question. I mean, hey, why is this? Why is that? But we didn't do that, and now that's lost forever, and stuff. But. But anyway, you try to learn as much as you can about your ancestry, and try to do better. Do better. That's all I can say. Do better. Yeah. Well, I guess I feel I see things need to be done, and I just go ahead and do it and say, if it's gonna get done, I mean, I'll do it. I mean, if nobody else gonna do it, But you just have to do what has to be done. Our church out there at Good Old Baptist Church there on 162. Hadn't been long, got out of the army. I just remember exactly what year it was, but I worked in the church. I worked in the church and seen things needed to be done. I know we needed to, try to build a new church and everything. So I told them that that's what we needed to do. So we started, with a building fund, and money couldn't be used. It had to be used on a new building, and stuff. And anyway, I, instrumental engineer, not engineer, but oversee, once the church decided we wanted to build a new church, and we, oversee it all the way, and watched every brick go in, every piece of wood go in, and worked it every night on it, until we, got it done, But anyway, that was a challenge there, and if something got to be done, I mean, hey, let's do it, just do it.
Well, I'm originally from Kansas City and Nashville, but my husband and I both went to Emory a long time ago. So we've been right here in Atlanta or out here in Newton County ever since we graduated from Emory, which would have been in 1963. Schools brought us to Atlanta. The farm that has been my husband's family since 1809 really brought us back out here to Newton County. The farm, we call it Burge, has been in my husband's family, as I said, since 1809. We operated as a private hunting, shooting, and family club now, which has permitted us to keep that land over the many years. Rather than, it's really hard to keep a farm of that size. Farming isn't very profitable anymore. So we found a way to share it with many other people and enjoy it. So we're still there. Well, he has been devoted to that land certainly for as long as I've known him. and managed to bring it back into his ownership from his nieces, nephews, brother, sister, and so forth. And his real goal in life was seeing that the farm stayed in the family. Farm has a very long and interesting history. It was operated as a plantation with enslaved persons. We have done, we've worked very hard to honor those memories, to honor the descendants of those people. And we're pleased we were able to do that because the eastern part of the county and the entire county was at one point all farmed, most of it by enslaved labor somewhere or other. And most of those histories have all been lost over the years because land's been sold and divided and sold again. So we're very proud that we were able to honor the past and keep the memory of those old days intact. We have rededicated a African American cemetery on the place. We have displays showing the history of the enslaved families that were there. And because my husband's great-grandmother, Dolly Burge, kept a diary much of her life, we know a lot about those families. We've had 2 Black reunions there that have been really interesting. The Burge Club, we call it the Burge Club now, yes. Over the years, it was the old Burge place for a long time. And like all land around here, it got pretty run down and it's pretty hard to keep it going. A lot, really. Along the way, I was involved and president of something called Smart Growth Newton County, and we worked hard to try to guide the development in a good way, and I think we did a pretty good job. The development has really taken off since then, so really not active there anymore. But I've been president of the Newton County Historical Society and involved in the church here and so forth. But I love the fact that you can't even park on this square on the weekends or even during the week. It's so active, and it's just wonderful that this kind of activity and prosperity goes on here. Lots of growth. And I think almost all of it is pretty positive. I know there's a lot of developments coming along and some people are worried about them, but I'm not. I think it's a good thing. Gosh, the biggest influence is probably the family and my husband, but it was a pleasure working with Sam Ramsey when he was a mayor for so many years. He guided things well. Davis Morgan, whom you all would not know, but he was the chairman of the commission. His father was before him too. He was a very far-sighted, intelligent guy, and I think he had a lot to do with the good things that are going on here. He set the framework. He was also very involved, I believe, in getting the Joint Development Authority going, which you all are familiar with. We moved out here in 1995 from Atlanta, but we had a foot out here all the time, always. We'd be out here a lot. My husband's parents lived here, his grandparents, and so forth. And keeping us here is is the farm that we love and the activities that go on there. Our children, we have 3 daughters and 9 grandchildren, and they're all devoted to the place too. 2 of the families are in Atlanta and one's out in California. Cherish the past, but when you look forward, look to the good of the entire county, not just to the good of whatever it is you're thinking about. Find something you love to do and do it to the extent you can. And when opportunities come along, grab them. Be a player. When something, don't just say, I don't think I really want to do that. Be out there and be a participant. The farm on which we live. That's it. And its history and its continuation as a successful place that our family loves and a lot of other people enjoy.
Since 1955. I had an experience with, I had a mother who was a very, very religious person.
Okay.
And in my early childhood, I was taught to do home economics jobs around for the family. That I learned. She taught me to cook, housekeeping, and other related home projects. And when I went to high school in Morgan County, I had a home ec teacher that was very encouraging. Well, let's see. During the integration in Georgia, the home economy for Newton County, well, maybe I should back up and tell you that Georgia had 2 extension education programs. One was for Negroes and one was for whites. So my very first experience after coming out of college was teaching home economics in Greene County. And at the end of the year in Greene County, I got married to a young man who was a Newton County resident. And that was 1953 when I got married. So I continued to work with the Negro Home Economics Program until the integration in Newton County. And that person who was holding that position as home economist resigned from her position. And as a white home economist program, the women agent title was economist. And for the Negro position, it was home demonstration agent. That was the difference in the titles of the 2 programs. So I continued to work as a Negro home economist or home demonstration agent until the integration. And after the integration, there was a county agent chairperson, Mr. Tom Bates. And Mr. Bates is not living now, I understand. But Mr. Bates was head of the county office. And I suppose I had made an impression that he appointed me to this position that the white home economist left. Now that's how I became a home economist in Newton County. Well, I exposed them to what I had been taught as a home economist. Because in college, we didn't think of it as being home or integrated or segregated. We were just taught. Okay, so I had workshops, and because I had worked there as a Negro home demonstration agent, I had an organized clubs group. So my first impression was, or the first thought I had, was to combine members of each group, of each race, should I say. And there was people like one lady who was a member of the Piney Grove Home Demonstration Club, Vivian Rogers. Vivian, along with the County Commissioner Chairman, Mr. Bates, was the 2 most outstanding people that really helped me to fill this position. And as I came in this morning, it reminded me of my first office in the courthouse. We parked right on the side. When I went down the step, and that was my first office. And my secretary was Helen Hargrove. Now, Helen Hargrove was the wife of Douglas Hargrove, who was a statewide extension leader. That's what Miss Hargrove's position was. And so all the people that I have named was inspiration in me taking this position. It wasn't something that I volunteered and applied for. I was assigned to it, thank God. No, I didn't volunteer and ask for the position. I was assigned to the position. Changing old attitudes. That was some of the struggle. But it didn't come as a problem to me, really. It was more or less a challenge. Because during my childhood days, I was also familiar with the other race. So this wasn't anything new with me. I remember Brooke Pennington, who you might know him as creating Brooke Pennington's seeds. Okay, I took care of him as when he was a little boy. I became his caretaker to play with him. And so I was familiar with the families of the other race. So this was not a frightening experience. It was more or less a challenging experience. And I got to know some of the most outstanding leaders that is in Newton County, like Frank Turner. And I remember Frank Turner Jr. so very much. And I don't know what has happened to him. I don't know if Frank is still alive or not. But he used to tease me because I moved so fast. But that was just a way of life. My mother always taught me that you don't put off things for tomorrow that can and should be done today. Now this was something I learned early as a child. And as I said, she was a very religious person. So I learned that there was a being that really would help you with whatever problems you had in life. So I learned to pray. And this I still practice. This is my philosophy today. If you want something doing, you first check with God and ask Him for guidance. And this is I do. Well, it helped to motivate me because as I said, my experience from childhood was that of working with others and loving everybody. I did not teach integration or segregation. That was never the role at all. It was just people, teaching people. Don't put off for tomorrow what can be done today for better living. And it was interesting how old attitudes were changed. And as to what motivated people to change their attitude, I'm not so sure I'm qualified to say that or to know that. But attitudes of people did change in Newton County. And as you know, there was many recognitions that I did get.
Yes.
And one of the most outstanding recognition, and I think that's one of the questions on there, but the one that meant most to me was I finally received a national extension in extensions in sales. Why am I forgetting this? I finally received an honor, a distinguished service award. And this was based on, I suppose, what I had done in Newton County. And I still don't know till today who nominated me for this award, but it had meant so very much to me. The most outstanding honor that I did receive. That still stays with me today. Always do whatever you can. Don't put off what can be done today for tomorrow. Do it now, because tomorrow, as my mother taught me, tomorrow really never come. And to prove this to me, I remember she said the next day, okay, now what day is this? And the answer had to be today, because it was, the next day was today. And her word was that tomorrow never comes, it's always today. So I hope that, in fact, this is what I taught my children. I had 2 children, a son and a daughter. And I always taught them, if what can be done today, do it today. Don't put it off until tomorrow, because tomorrow may never come.
Different from what it is now, for sure, and no question about it. Okay. I know when I was a kid, I lived 2 blocks south of the square, and the pavement on Church and Monticello Street stopped where they come together down there. And during the war, when people couldn't get tires, they didn't, but farmers apparently couldn't get tires. You wouldn't hear these people coming to town on Saturday. Everybody came to town on Saturday. Farmers stayed on their farms in the week, but on Saturday they came to town. And when they would hit the pavement down there at Church and Monticello Street, you could hear them because they didn't have any tires on their cars. They were driving in on the rims, making sparks because they didn't have tires, but they needed to get to town to buy their groceries and things like that. So that was impressive. I remember that as a kid, hearing those old cars come to town with no tires on the no tires on the wheels. That was different. And I remember when the war was over. I was 5 or 6 maybe. I guess I was 6 by then. And they came and said the war was over, and I said I was glad about that. But I do remember some friends of my mom and daddy's getting killed in the war. Yeah, it was pretty terrible. Yeah. Well, not all of my life. I was here till I was 18, and I came back when I was 30. So there were 12 years I was at school, and I spent 7 years in the Navy. Yeah, and came back in 1970. I attended Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, and University of Georgia in Athens. And while I was in the Navy, I got a master's in business administration at the University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. Well, I was born here. Well, I wasn't born here. I was born in Emory University, Georgia. That's on my passport. Place of birth, Emory University, Georgia. It was an incorporated city at that time. University was, and that's on my birth certificate. But I lived all my life here, except for the time when I was in Scotland in the Navy. Yeah. Oh yeah, too many, I guess. I was a spoiled child, to say the least. My brother had a little race car that looked just like an Indianapolis racer. It had a lawnmower motor in the back. And we'd get it out of the garage where I lived, like I said, 2 blocks south of the square. There's a red brick house across the street from the front of the Methodist church. And I'd back that thing out of the garage and come around the square. You could go either way around the square at that time. And your cars went both ways around the square, and it was fun. Didn't have to have a tag. And I remember also some things about the city. The police department was right across the street. It's got a sign on it now that says fire station, but it was the police department, city hall, and the fire department was over on this behind Ramsey Furniture. But there was a wire that went from there to the clock tower. And they only had one policeman at night, and he would ride around us checking on things. And they didn't have a radio, and of course they didn't have cell phones. So if any disturbance came out and somebody called the police department, they'd get the fire chief who lived there. And he would say, okay, I'll get word to the police. And he would go over there and throw a switch, and they'd turn the light out on the square, on the clock. And when the light wasn't burning on the clock, the policeman would see that and say, I need to go back down there and ask the fire chief what sort of phone call he had. And he'd call. And when they'd have a fire, this fire siren would go, whoo, all over town, and all the it's a volunteer fire department other than the chief. And they would all come to the fire station. The first man there had an old American LaFrance fire truck that was on a ramp. And he would pull those chocks out, jump in that thing, and roll it down that ramp. And that started rolling down that ramp. And he would take off to the fire, and they had a board out front with numbers 1 through 6. And if it was in a certain section of town, he'd light up that number. So when the volunteers would come, they'd know where to go to help fight the fire. And Daddy always said, had one standpipe, water standpipe over on Rivers Hill. It's been torn down right where I-20 and Emory Street cross. And Daddy said, in the middle of the night, they'd have a fire. They'd go, whoo, wake everybody in town up. And everybody'd be awake, so they'd go to the bathroom. And said, then when the fire truck got the fire, wasn't any water left because everybody flushed the toilets after they went to the bathroom. Well, like I said, there's a lot more paved roads than there were. As a matter of fact, when I was city manager, I'd have people coming from the film commission, and they would have a film guy say, I need a dirt road. And it's harder and harder to find a dirt road to film a movie on now because there's no dirt roads because most everybody's gotten their road paved by now. That's changed. When I was a kid, street lights were corrugated metal circles like that with a light bulb hanging down under them. Just an old incandescent light bulb. And then later on, the street lights changed to mercury vapor lights. It gave out that blue light. And then they changed to sodium vapor lights, which gave out the yellow light. And now they've changed to the LED lights, which have a real pretty light and don't use much energy. But that street light changes is the main thing that I can notice through the time. And the pavement, of course, and traffic routing. Of course, when I was a kid, the old Atlanta Highway was a 2-lane road all the way to Atlanta. It took at least an hour to get to Atlanta, sometime an hour and a half. But since they've got, and then they came with 278. When I was in high school, before I had a car, the 278 stopped at Emory Street. It didn't go across out here. And you can see the right-of-way west of Emory Street is much narrower than it is west of Emory Street because they bought more right-of-way then when they did the second part. But then they put I-278 through. That took a lot of traffic off. The old Atlanta Highway, you came in on Atlanta Highway up there by the Georgia Depot. You came down to Clark Street, went right in front of the courthouse, and on down to Madison. That was 278. That's the way you got to Madison. That's the way you got to Atlanta. Then they put 278 over there, moved it over there. That took a lot of traffic off the square. And then later on, much later, they built I-20, which took the traffic off at 278. And fortunately, it left downtown Covington looking like 1957. And that's why the movie people like it so much. It has a sort of an old-timey look to it. Here in Newton County, I was city manager for 35 years and enjoyed that. It was fun, particularly when people's sewage would stop up and things like that. People's basement would get full of sewage. That was always fun to talk to them about how it wasn't our problem that the sewer line stopped up, but they think it would be. But no, seriously, it was a good job. It was a fun job because there was so many different things to do. If the one department had some trouble, I could say, well, I'm going to go down to the wastewater treatment plant. And building that wastewater treatment plant was innovative and new. We were unique in the Covington. A lot of the reason we have industry in Covington is because of the wastewater treatment facility. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but in wastewater, when you get through with garbage, sewage, dishwashers, washing machines, you have an awful lot of ammonia in the form of nitrates. Are y'all old enough to remember a diaper bucket? Diaper buckets smell like ammonia. They smell terrible with those old cloth diapers in them. That's ammonia in the form of nitrates. That's in sewage. Then you have a lot of, when you wash your hands, you want your hands to bubble. They put phosphate in the soap. That makes a surfactants. It makes the bubbles. Doesn't make your hand get any cleaner, but you believe it does because you got to have those bubbles. That's phosphate. A fertilizer sack has 3 numbers on the front of it. nitrogen, ammonia in the form of nitrates, potash, which is just always there, and phosphates. So we had 3 of the numbers of a fertilizer sac in the sewage when you get through with it. For years it went right into the dried Indian Creek, and then it went in Jackson Lake. Then we got a sewage treatment plant in the 1950s that took out the solids, all kinds of crazy things that you could see. And it purified it, but it still had a lot of ammonia in the form of nitrates and the phosphates put in Jackson Lake. That made Jackson Lake bloom, literally. The water in Jackson Lake would be a bright green, and it was killing the lake. So they said, in the Clean Water Act of 1972, said you've got to get that stuff out of the creeks. So we built a land application system. We took that water and bought several hundreds of acres down south of town. You ought to go see it sometime. It's a big tree forest down there with thousands of rainbird sprinklers, putting this water on those trees, fertilizing those trees. And when they harvest the trees, they're not fit for lumber because they grow so fast from the fertilizer. All they can do with them is make pulpwood out of them. But you can harvest those trees about every 8 to 10 years instead of 15 to 20 years. And that takes the nutrients and puts it into trees instead of into the rivers and streams. So that was a big change. That was a big change technically. And just lots of different things. The fire department's grown drastically as places have expanded and need more fire protection. The police department, more and more police necessary. I mean, I-20's been great, but it's no trouble to come down here and rob a store and get back to Atlanta in 10 minutes. So you get a lot more people coming into town. They dump bodies in Newton County. If they wouldn't have done that before, you'd have to drive an hour, and you don't want to drive an hour with a body in the trunk. Now you can do it in 35 minutes and dump some on the side of the highway down here. So it's just, things are getting worse and things are getting better. I'm too old to move. I'm well ensconced. I'm happy where I am. Being facetious, I can tell you what the Navy corpsmen always told people who went to sick bay. They'd say, you take 2 aspirin, drink a lot of water, and walk slow. Just the main thing is to try to get on with each other. Just try to love one another. I mean, that's the hardest thing for some people to do, and it's the most necessary thing to do. Just love everybody you're with. To love one another, again, as I said before, to try to love one another. That's the most difficult thing for a lot of people to do. Fear of the other. Fear of the other. Whether you're a Democrat and they're Republicans, they're the other. You're scared of them. If you're black and I'm white, that's different. So you're worried about them. Fear of the other. We need to get over that and to recognize it's the other are just like us. A family that'll contribute and be contributive to the society, I hope. We got a son and a grandson living here. Got a son and grandson living in Salt Lake City, but I think the ones living here can just try to contribute.
I've lived in Newton County 91 years. That's my home. I was born and raised here in Newton County. All except the time I was here till I went off to college, went to the Army, and that's it. Okay. And I've been here ever since. Well, after I finished college, Clark College, I got a job here in Newton County with the Board of Education, and I enjoyed it very, very much. When I first went there, though, it wasn't too good because everything was different. Everything was different from Newton County, you know, but after I stayed there, well, matter of fact, my superintendent, he knew the chairman of the board in social service. He got the job as the superintendent, but he was working at that time here in Newton County. And I was the assistant principal at the elementary school over in Porterdale. So he wanted me to go with him. I said, okay, let's see if the money right. So we got the money right, and I decided to go down there with him. He stayed with me 1 year and left me. I left me by myself. So I stayed down there until I retired, about 17 years. Well, when I first went there, it wasn't too good. You know, white was fighting against the black was fighting against the white, and I had a hard time during that first year. And after that year, my man left me by myself, so I stayed on that. The board insisted I stay with them. So I stayed on with them and took care of everything. At that time, we didn't have no newspaper. In other words, when I went to social circuit, it was backward, completely. And I made it what it is today. I did. We didn't have no newspaper. We didn't have nothing to work with, hardly. They just had a school, and that was it. They didn't have no kind of discipline, no kind of nothing. But I turned all that stuff around. I was in the Forest engineer, and I got my basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And after I got my training, come back, they sent me to what's called McDonald, to the welding place. I stayed, and I was right here at home. I go back and forth every day while I was in service. And when I finished that, they sent me overseas to France. And when I went to France, I was driving the lieutenant around every day. I was dressed up every day in my A1 uniform. I didn't have no problem. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my service. Well, I decided, I said, nah, I think I can do a little better. Let me go higher. So I decided to get me a master's degree in administration. That would push me up higher, you see. Then I would be able to talk with the people, get them to understand, see what I understand. Well, right now I have about two or three businesses. My first business I had was the bonding. I was a bail bondsman. And the reason why I decided that, you know, I was just out of college, didn't know what to do, just doing it. And I applied for a bonding job due to the fact we didn't have but one bondsman here in Newton County. And that was Mr. Holyfield. He was a white fella. So I said, I'm gonna try it too. So I applied for it, and the next 3 or 4 days, I got an answer saying I had made the deal. But now I got another business now. I call it Under the Stars Banquet Center. Yes, City Council of Oxford, Georgia. 37 years. That was good. That was good. Every now and then I run into a problem, but I let them know in the very beginning I was the first person, black man, to be on the city council. So I let them know in the beginning I was here for the right thing and not nobody's baby. I must speak my piece. And I didn't have no more trouble. But the people in Oxford, they the one put me in, white and black. And they worked with me all the way. All the way. I didn't have no problem with them. Every now and then, when the council members would flare up with something, you know, I put them back in the track. Let them know where I stand, and that was it. Well, school has changed over time. See, a long time when I was going to school, we had a black school and we had a white school. But since then, it's changed. We done integrated to school. Yeah, it done changed quite a bit. Yeah, and I think that's the best part.
The change?
The change. I think that's the best part, the change. Yeah. Fight for what you want. Don't give up. Put your trust in God and He will take care of you. That's my legacy.
I was born and reared here in Covington. It was just four of us. And I used to have a lot of relatives here, but most of them are deceased. But even when I was in high school, I liked to mix up stuff, you know what I'm saying? And so I was a member of the NAACP before I was in high school. They used to have a junior chapter of it, and I attended it. And I was just always active in different things here in Covington. And then for some reason, Emmett Till's death struck me. And every time I saw that picture, it was just really did something to me. So I just felt like something ain't right. But coming up in Covington and being a girl, you wasn't gonna go to many places in my age because our parents didn't allow it. We don't float around like these kids do this day. First of all, we didn't have enough to float around in and didn't have no money to pay for it then. So, you know, we learned to do things for ourselves, and we were taught different things, skills that a lot of these kids need to know today, but they'll never know because they don't know how essential it is when you get older to understand some of those things they were trying to tell you when you were younger and foolish and didn't want to listen to nobody, and when you knew everything, so nobody need to tell you anything. I was the first black at the newspaper in Covington. And to work somewhere for a while and people not answer you just like you were invisible. Every day I came home, I was gonna quit. My mama wouldn't let me. So I ended up being at the newspaper 18 years. And after I left the newspaper, I went to work. My mother was in work for the Board of Education, and I used to tease her about it. Then I ended up working for the Board of Education in the library. Of course, I'm not fitted for the library because they're supposed to be quiet, and that wasn't me, but they said they were looking for a change, and I definitely would be it. So I was with the Board of Education 31 years. Every person who had run for office, I had helped them. Some of those persons, I had also written their speeches. So one day we were having a meeting and they told me, Janet, we think it's about time you run. I said, y'all don't tell me what to do. They said, well, you need to run. You've helped everybody else. You need to do this yourself. And I said, no, I don't want to do that because people be all in your business. And they said, well, you ain't really got none. I said, that's beside the point. So I decided to run. And I won. And I was told by some white friends of mine that the guy that I ran against was telling people he wasn't worried about me. And somebody told him, you need to worry. So that night when I went in to be sworn in, I was invisible to him. He passed by me like he had never seen me before. And I was just so proud because I knew that I had got him where it hurt. Well, like I said, because I was active, and sometimes to be able to make changes, you need to be in there where the changes are made, and that had me wanting to be a part of something, because sometimes you can't change things from the inside because you don't know how that works. But if you know what's happened from the very beginning, it may be something you can do or talk to somebody else and try to fix it. So that was my point. I wanted to be able to make Covington better I didn't have a good childhood in Covington because of the way I was treated as a child. So it's not the fact, I didn't join this because I had such a good life here in Covington. I joined it because there needed to be a change. Even at the newspaper, when I was in the 7th grade a few years ago, I won in a science project. And you had, whatever I made, you had to put it together, then it would spark. So my picture was on the front page of the Covington News down to the very end. And the kids at school was making fun of me because the picture was so black, you could only see my pigtails and my socks. So one of my girlfriends said, Janet, don't pay them no attention. She said, can't see you, but they can read your name, girl. And then I just went on. I didn't think about that. I used to, when I was in high school, a lot of afternoons I would go uptown and sit on those stools uptown. Never, and most of the time they just wouldn't say nothing to me. But then, one day when I went up there, there were no more stools. There were 3 drugstores in town. All of them had stools, but they no longer had stools. They would rather stand up than allow me to sit down. And my mama would tell me a lot of days, I'm talking about when I was in high school now, a lot of days mama said, Janet, don't go uptown messing with the white folks. I told you about that. I said to myself, okay, not till I get up there. Because I knew that's what I was going to do because I did it all the time. And then we had people who were mean. My father used to take me and show me how to fill out a money and all this kind of stuff. I was probably in middle school. My mother was the first traffic officer in Covington. It would help kids cross the street and stuff. And so she sent my dad down there to pick up her check because she was sick. So when we got down there, my dad said, Jana, you mind going your mama's check? I said, no, I'll go. And I went in there and I told them what I wanted. And they pointed to where I needed to go, and it was to the clerk's office in City Hall. That woman talked to me so mean, and I ain't never forgot it. And I'm not gonna tell who it was, but I was able to sell a few things with her years later. So when I got back to the car, my dad said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Yes, it is." And I told him. He said, "Well, don't tell your mama, cause I didn't have no business sending you in there in the first place." He said, "So we'll just keep it, and I won't never make that mistake again. Okay?" I said, "Okay." Then one Saturday, I'm just gonna tell one more. I went to the shoe store in Covington. It was called Bill's Shoe Shop to pick up some shoes. And I went in, and I told him my name and everything. And whatever he asked me, I said yes. And he asked something. I said yes. He told me, "You ain't gonna say no yes to me, you know what he called me." So he had the shoes, so he just threw them back up on the counter. So I went back to the car. My dad said, "Janet, the shoes weren't ready." I said, "Yes, sir, they were ready." He said, "Well, what happened?" I said, "The man wouldn't let me have them." He said, "Why?" And I told him. He said, "Let me go in here." He said, "Sit here." He said, "No, I don't want you to sit." He said, "Come on, let's go." He went in there. He said, "I understand that my daughter picked up some shoes and you wouldn't let her have them." "No, she wouldn't say yes." He said, "She doesn't have to say yes, sir, to you." She said, "I know my daughter wasn't disrespectful because I didn't teach her that." He said, "She's taught to say yes and no, or yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am." He said, "Now give me them shoes." And he slammed them on the counter. And then Dad asked him how much they were. He told him. When we got back to the car, my dad said, "Jan," said, "I can buy you another pair of shoes. I can't buy another daughter." I said, "Okay." So I was just always on the rim of things, trying to get things passed. Now, the sheriff in Covington, if blacks were having a meeting and I was going to be in the meeting, he would not meet with them because he was so fond of me. So a lot of times people have to meet with he refused to meet with me. One of the changes were we had the square. We were not allowed in that park, period. There was a sign on the steps out here that said white only. And they had a white water dispenser over there. When you went into a lot of these doctor's offices, they had the audacity to have a side door or either just somewhere you to enter, but everybody else came in the front door. So I didn't like that. And whoever dentist I went to, I didn't want to go back no more because we were in there and I heard other people talking and I peeped around and I saw they had a nice place to be. And here I am and something about big as me. I didn't want to give him my money. a lot of people don't remember mistreating people, but the person that you mistreated never forget it. Now, my brother had a hard time at Newton High. Just about every Monday, we used to kid my mother and daddy because they had to go to Newton High every Monday morning because my brother got in a fight. So, but then it turned around and he got better. And then some of the guys that he fought all the time, they became best friends. So that worked out good. There was a time when you could go in the store and you could spend all the money you wanted, but there was nobody like you in any of those stores. I remember distinctly, Coins was one that hired blacks, and then Harper's. So there was only one place in Covington around the square that had air conditioning. And I remember, not only did it have air conditioning, it had an elevator. So a lot of people made their business to go to Bill's to buy something. And then me, I just like to ride the elevator because that was just something you didn't see that often. Well, I think if I had taken the other road, I would be a national activist. But I chose not to do that. And see, some of these same people that I'm talking about, they still exist today. And I didn't forget it now. But you have to move on and try to fix things because you're fixing for everybody. And young people are not like that because they weren't brought up separate and not equal. They were brought up equal as far as they were concerned. And they do not discriminate against each other. They don't see color like we were taught to see color. And we were forced to see it because that's all we could see. So, and working with young people, you act a little bit different because they sometimes I said something, oh, Miss G, you just old school. I said, Miss G, oh, she's supposed to be old school. But then they gonna listen to me though, every single time, or if not, they'll come back and say, well, Miss G, you was right. I said, I know what I told you in the first place. And then at school sometimes when some of the kids would be doing, in college, and the parents be talking to them about doing something they didn't want to do, they'd call me. It's good, you need to talk to your boy, he's not this and that. And so I got a lot of insight from them, and then to when they want to know something and they find out how things really were, they think that only happened on TV. Oh, my parents, every time I thought I couldn't do something, they didn't want to hear it. Say, well, because sometimes you can try so hard to do something and you just give up, but don't care what it was. I had their backing and I knew that. And I wasn't saying right or wrong because I wasn't wrong. But I knew that whatever it was, that I had two people that was gonna go along with whatever I wanted to do. I would like my legacy to be that I always thought of somebody other than myself, that I was kind to everybody, compassionate to teenagers and youth, and just tried to be a better person. Not only in the eye when people can look at me, but be a better person, period. So that when somebody says something about me, they can be corrected and find out. Because most of the time, if you want to know how I'm feeling about something, all you have to do is ask, and I'll tell you. When I got on the council, I thought it was going to be so difficult for me, but they were so welcoming, and that was from the day I went there until the day I left. So we never had any qualms or anything like folk did, and we got along and we made sure that the people had what they needed, and much was accomplished.
I've lived in Newton County since I was 6 weeks old, and I'll be 63 years old on December 11th of this year. I grew up here, as far as I can remember, back in the early 60s, so that was the transition of segregated accommodations for blacks and whites. And so when I was a little girl, the signs had just come down for white only and colored only, but they were still separate accommodations. So even in this building, The public bathroom was in the back of this building, like down in a kind of like a awful little place, and it smelled bad. So I never used the bathroom when I came away from home because it wasn't clean. And another earliest memory is going to the dentist when I was about 4 years old, and I could read at that time, and the dentist office was right across the street, right above where the Bread and Butter restaurant is now. So when I read waiting room, I said to my grandmother, well, here's where we go. And she said, nope, that's not our waiting room. So over the years, I've seen the movement in the late 60s, early 70s, schools desegregated. And I don't use the word integration because I do not believe that even in 2021 we have full integration in Newton County. I think racism still exists, just the fact that we still have to have the discussion. Racism still exists, and there's still prejudice in many arenas. When we were in the 6th grade, I went to Washington Street Elementary School, which is now on the site of the Washington Street Community Center. What's left of the school was where the library, the principal's office, and the cafeteria, that's that end of the building. The rest of the building that new residents of Newton County don't know was our main school building. And when I was in the 6th grade, I guess federal law mandated that schools had to be desegregated the following year. And so imagine waking up and your school is on fire in the middle of the night. And so brave citizens, tried to salvage the next day what was left in the school building. And you would think that with 2.5 months or so left in the school year, what would you do? They would move students to another school. They didn't move us to another school. When the sun was shining, we had to sit outside, and we were taught outside in chart desks, and the teachers did the best they could. And then when it rained, they herded us into the cafeteria, and they huddled us into corners. And the cafeteria that you know now as the community center was the same cafeteria we had with the kitchen. So imagine them having to serve breakfast and lunch. And so the following year, 7th grade, because the white people who were resistant to change said that they didn't want their children going to school with the N-word, Negroes, black people. And so the following fall, when it was time to go to school, the buses were supposed to pick us up, and we lived right off of Washington Street by Grace United Methodist Church. So we waited and waited and waited, and the bus didn't come until about 9:30. So I grew up with my grandmother, so she walked over to the Board of Education office, which is at the corner of Anderson Avenue and Newton Drive. And so she asked Mr. Richardson, who was our superintendent, why wasn't there a bus for the children in our community? And he said, well, Maggie, we don't have enough buses. So what she did, she took it upon herself, and she asked one of our former neighbors, who was a bus driver for white children in Porterdale. He picked us up. My brother and I walked to the top of the hill. So we got to school about 45 minutes early because he had to go do his route to pick up other children. And then afterwards, we sat, and I thought about it years later, we had to sit in the back of the bus while he took the white kids home, and then we got home about 45 minutes late. And so the teachers that I had, one of them said many, many years later, because I was a pretty decent student, all A's and everything, and she said that I was so smart that even the white children had to ask me questions to help them with their homework. And so, kids call your name. When we were in the band, they threw rocks at your bus. When we went certain places, teachers didn't want to answer your questions. So, yeah, I've experienced some prejudice. And then when I went to Y Camp up in Toccoa, and then when I went to 4-H camp down at Rock Eagle, my grandmother always warned me that when I took a shower to take my clothes in with me because the girls would play tricks on you and everything. And then you'd be without clothes and you couldn't go anywhere. So I've seen a lot more than that, but those were a few examples of my early education in Newton County. So I'm from here. I mean, the only reason that I got here when I was 6 weeks old is because my mother had me in Louisiana. But our family's from here. My mother just passed away last year, August of 2020, but the house is on the two houses are on the same piece of property that we've been able to own since black people could own land here in Newton County after the Civil War. So we have history here. My great-great-great-grandfather was Tony Baker. He was born somewhere around 1837. He was the first pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church. And Bethlehem Baptist Church, 1849, was the Colored Baptist Church. Then in 1850 became Bethlehem. And he pastored the church for 46 years, then was followed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was Michael King when my mother and them knew him, but his maternal grandfather was the pastor at Bethlehem. So then our family's always been here. My mother and aunt, grew up here, going to school here, graduating in the Washington Street High School class of 1947. And they were told when they went to Morris Brown, they graduated, and my grandparents were counseled in 1951 for them not to challenge the state school system of segregation because it wasn't time for colored children to go to white universities. So my mother and my aunt were then given paid educations. My mother first she went to check out Michigan State University for her master's. She didn't put down her race. She gets up there and they said to her they didn't have housing for colored women. And then she came back down to Evanston, Illinois, and the then president of the Board of Regents, a wonderful man named Mr. Bob Arnold, who the Arnold Fund locally is named for. Mr. Bob and Miss Florence didn't have children, but their maid was my grandmother's best friend. So they went over to meet with him, and he said, well, Imogene, we'll send you wherever you want to go. She went to Northwestern, got her master's in 1955. They had already taught here in Newton County. They taught at a county school. If you know where James Paschal Baptist Church is, immediately to the left or to the north of James Paschal, go down 278 to 142. There are now 2 apartments right next to the church. That was a 2-room schoolhouse. So my mother taught there for her first year, and my aunt taught in Newbern, somewhere off of 213, but I don't think that building is still standing. My aunt did not teach the full year, and jokingly, my mother was always sore about that because my aunt discovered that they were teaching children who were sharecropping children, and they had to pad the books to say they were at school every day to get the free fruit that the federal government would give based on the number of students in school. So my aunt went over to the superintendent, who was Mr. Fickwood, who the theme school is named after. And she said, I cannot lie. She turned in her attendance book and she quit. And so my mother always was upset because she said my aunt, whose name was Ernestine, she got paid for the rest of the year and my mother had to work. So my aunt finished the year being a nanny for a rich white family up in Connecticut, meandered back down to Philadelphia, went to the Temple School of Social Work, so that's where she did her graduate work, and she retired with about 35 years as a social worker, writing some of the foster care plans. She was the one for the city of Philadelphia, and she wrote the maternity policy because when she had my youngest cousin as a social worker and came back, they wanted her to start at ground zero. She petitioned, and so they rewrote the rules. My mother did wonderful things as she taught down in South Georgia, in Irwinton, Georgia. She was teaching. She was one of the first special education teachers in the state of Georgia when the federal law was passed in the early 60s. And then my mother tells us, she told us of stories where once children came to her and they said, Miss Williams, tar is dripping on us in the bathroom. And so she went in there and they had done a half job of re-roofing the school. She knew then Governor Lester Maddox. She wrote him a letter. And on a teacher's work day, he sent word to her that he would come down and check it out. And she said, I can't tell him that I called the governor. So he comes down, he's like, Imogene, where's the bathroom? She's like, nods her head. They go down there, the bathroom got fixed over the weekend. And she also realized that black teachers and white teachers got paid different salaries for the same job, even here in Newton County. She complained that they were taking 25 cents out of her check. And when she went over to see the superintendent, he said that the check had to be printed and the secretary had to mail it. And she said because it's a public school system with federal funds, those monies are already allocated, and she asked for a refund of all of her money that had been, that had been taken out of her check. So we have, our family's been here forever, so I feel a calling, to stay here and do what I can to try to help neighbors, friends, and family. So education was so important in our family. My mother and my aunt's mother, my grandmother, who actually brought my brother and I up, when she was born, April 20th, 1908, her mother and her twin sister died. So her dad, the story goes that her dad brought her in a basket to her grandmother, who was born in slavery, somewhere around 1861, actually was alive here in Covington when General Sherman marched through. Her grandmother didn't understand the importance of education. My grandmother grew up with her grandmother on the same corner where our property is, as I said earlier. And when my grandmother was about 13-ish, 14, some people came to the house and they said, we would like to pay for Maggie to go to finish high school and then go on to Spelman, because she was a smart student. And back then they called it normal school to finish high school. So her grandmother, who did not know any better, and it was no fault of her own, with no formal education, she thought about it. She said my grandmother was old and she needed to go to work and, start having a family. So my grandmother made a promise that if she ever had children, they would go not just finish high school, but go on to college. So education was expected. Academic excellence was expected. You just had no choice in my grandmother's household. So when it came time to apply, to think about college, because I always knew I was going, I thought that I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, because my grandfather, who taught me how to read from his wheelchair, I thought I'd be an orthopedic surgeon and, be some cure to help people with multiple strokes learn to walk and do some things. But that didn't pan out. We got a doctorate in another area. But so when I started thinking about college, all through, school, through junior high school, because we didn't have middle school here, we had junior high school. Junior high school was on where the old R.L. Cousins is. That was our 8th and 9th grade year. And then where Sharp Learning Center is now, that's where we spent 10th grade, because the high school was supposed to be finished. It wasn't, so we went to the new high school that's been torn down. Shows you how old I am. But we went there in the fall of 1974, so Horace's class was the first one to graduate, and we were the second. So in the 10th grade, my SAT scores were so high that those scores would get me into Harvard, right? So my little contest for 11th and 12th grade was to just try to better my SAT scores that I had in the 10th grade. Because back then, my grandmother said, go do your best, so it wasn't a PSAT, regular SAT. My 10th grade scores were good enough to get me into Harvard, Howard, Yale, Emory, so I thought, and also at that time, black colleges, now called HBCUs, were in financial crises. So the Morris Browns of the world, the Clarks, probably not Spelman and Morehouse, not Tennessee State, but most of them were in a financial crisis as I was about to graduate high school in 1976. So my grandmother made the choice for me. I tell people I didn't make a choice to go to Oxford College. She told me that Mr. Bob Arnold, same Mr. Bob, sent the money for my deposit for my dorm and for my application, and my grandmother said, you got a full scholarship to go to Oxford, so that's where you're going. And if you knew my grandmother, what did I say? Yes, ma'am. And so that's where, so I go to Oxford, fall of 1976, on a full academic scholarship, full scholarship. But since we're talking about how we've seen the community grow and everything, and there was embedded even discrimination and prejudice, even in the scholarships, because we were given ID numbers. I'm Z0762, still remember it like a brand from 1946. That was my ID number. But the black students were given monetary scholarships. The white students were given percentage scholarships. So let's say it costs $10,000 your first year. So I got 10 grand. Keep your grade point average up. You know, I got to 10,000. But guess what happens the second year? Tuition and fees go up. The white kids, because they have 100% scholarship, if it went up to 11, they got $11,000. Avis got introduced to NDSL, National Direct Student Loans. They said, Avis, you only got $10,000 a year. So we have signed right here, and imagine 1976 when the minimum wage was $1.70. Well, I was making $1.76 an hour. And then I got a raise to $1.85. I think in 4 years, I was making $2.12 an hour in 1980. So I graduated Oxford in 1978 with an associate's degree. I didn't finish college on time. I mean, I'm proud to tell that story. I had too much fun in my undergraduate years. I didn't finish on time, so my senior GPA dropped. So out of embarrassment, you know, I left school for a while. I went back later, you know, got my bachelor's degree in chemistry, worked as a chemist, owned my own business. Oxford and Emory were very lonely places for black students academically. Our only friends at Oxford were the custodians and the people that sat at the desk in the dormitory and the people that worked in the cafeteria. So in Horace's class, the late Judge Horace Johnson, there were 8, because I was counting them. And imagine after 45 years, I can still name all 8 of his class. They were sophomores when I was a freshman, and where they were from. And I can name all 7 of the ones in my class and where they were from, because we had to become a family. We had no black faculty. So the first wave of students, the late John Hammonds Jr., who's Raymond's older brother, had a perfect SAT score, graduated Oxford in 1970, but had such a hard time, he transferred over to Georgia State and got his accounting degree. Others had a hard time, you know, being called words and, you know, finding things hanging in your room. And when I got up to Emory, start of my senior year, my roommate hated black people. Well, 2 nights a week I worked 6 to midnight, because I got NDSLs. I had about $8,000 in loans by then, right? In the fall of 1979. So I get off at midnight, come back in my room, and the girl screaming, I'm in the bed at 9 o'clock. And really, she hated black people. So when my brother would come visit, by then he was a sophomore at Morehouse, she screamed. So she left after 3 weeks, and I got a very good roommate who was from Bainbridge, Georgia. So when we were never able to tell her grandparents that her roommate was black, me, because they were very prejudiced. And when her mother called one day, she said, never forget it, she said, don't they have schools for y'all? Why are you at Emory? And I had to remember my grandmother's very tactful way of teaching us how to answer questions. I said, you know, I want to go to medical school, Miss Powell, and Emory's one of the best, and so that's why I'm here, and I earned the right, you know, to be able to go. And she said, oh, I guess that's a good reason. But they never came to visit their daughter during the whole year because she occupied space with a black person. So we had maids at Emory, because a lot of the kids are rich from the Northeast and everything. So imagine being from Covington, somebody knocks on your door, and it's somebody you know because they're a friend of your grandmother's, and she said, I'm here to clean your room. And I said, Miss, and I called her name. I said, but you can't clean my room because Miss B, that's what we call my grandmother. I said, she'll kill me because I'm not over here. And she said, I need my job, Avis. So she had, once a week, she had to come in, sweep my room, mop my room, clean my counter, straighten up things on the counter. Every day she had to empty my trash. And then if I had paid for the extra service, she would strip my bed and change my bed. because that's what the white girls had been used to, because they had maids and nannies at their own homes. And what really disturbed me was that, I'll be 63, so you grew up with respect calling them Miss or Mister. They called them by their first name, and they were old enough to be the kids' grandparents. So we saw that, and then another story in the library, I've told this a couple of times, that when I went over and got introduced to the library, the lady who worked in the library as a custodian, when it was time for a break, I went and I said, would you like to come have a 15-minute break with me? And she said, Avis, I can't go in the break room. She said, I can only clean it. And so I said, but, it's the break room. She said, let me show you. She took me to a mop closet under the stairs in the back of the library, and there was a 5-gallon bucket. She said, that's what I sit on. It was dark and dingy, and the sinks with that the mop goes into. So that's where she had to wring her mop but that's also where she had to eat her lunch and her sandwich. So she said, don't say anything, because I'll lose my job. I was 17 years old, so we had a new dean. I go to the head librarian and I said, because I asked my grandmother about it, I said, well, how do I fix this? And she told me some strategic ways to approach it. So I go to the head librarian and I said, I think she has, and back then they called them senile. So I said, I think she has senility. And so the librarian says, huh? I said, she still thinks it's 1876 that black people and white people can't eat together. And she sits back and then she says, what do you mean? I said, she told me that she's not welcome in the break room. And then I added, I wonder what our new dean would think if the custodian thinks that she's not welcome to eat in the break room with the white people. But I don't want her to know that I said anything, because she's afraid you'll fire her if I say something. So needless to say, when I went to work the next week, she said, Avis, did you do anything? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And she was eating in the break room. But I mean, little things, you got to speak up, because you got to figure out a way to do it. Because if I confronted it in a strange way, she'd have lost her job, and her husband was a custodian at one of the churches. So we couldn't have that, so I just had to do what I needed to do. Gotta know Jesus. Sometimes it's very tough if someone calls you out of your name, or you're being discriminated against, or you don't get all the homework assignment, or you're expected to do above and beyond. You have to jump higher, run faster just because of the color of your skin. In the 10th grade, I was the best flute player in the band, but I couldn't be the first chair flute player because the 3 white girls had parents who were very notable figures in our community. So, and then the band director talked to my grandmother, and he said, well, but I'll make her first chair, second section, so she'll sit on the end and everybody can see her. But that made me the 4th flute player, and I was the number 1 flute player. And he said, well, but one of them is going to be, assistant drum major, one's a flag, and the other 2 were flag girls. So technically, in football season, she'll occupy the first seat, but it wasn't given to me, honestly, right, because of the color of my skin. So, getting to know Jesus, growing up in a great church, learning love. Hate was never preached at our house. My grandmother just said, put something between your ears and let education speak for you. And then learn temperance and patience. But also don't be afraid to speak up, but know strategically when you've surveyed the whole situation, how to speak up. Because in this, talking to young people, it's something when you're looking at a gun and a white person is talking to you, right? So, we tell them how to respond when the police stop you. So I've been stopped twice. So I was in this small town, coming back to Covington, coming back home, and I don't go through this particular town at night because I have better sense, right? Middle of the day, I left Macon, coming home, and I see the police pulls me over, and I have an Emory plate on my car, just because I'm proud of my alma mater for those 4 degrees, right? And I think I was on my 3rd one then. So the guy comes up to me, I knew I was in trouble when he said, hey, Missy. He said, where are you going? So he stood where I could see his gun, and I'm trying not to wet my pants because you're like, nobody knows I'm here, and I keep my wallet like right under the seat. So I asked him, I said, would you mind if I get my, he said, I need to see your driver's license. I said, sir, because I know how to be Southern then, right? Because he's showing his gun, like literally he pulls this back, so I'm looking right at his gun. And he says, where's your driver's license and your insurance, missy? Well, we were using computers by then, so he knew he'd already run my plate. But I said, sir, my license is right under my seat. I just need to reach. Told him what the wallet looks like. It's the first thing in there. I hand it to him. And that's why, on a sidebar way, that's why I appreciate satellite radio, and I pay for it now, because Gospel Station was on. And he says to me, he said, you sound like you mighty happy, missy. Do you work up there at that Emory University? And I said, no, sir, finishing my master's. Well, why are you so happy? And he kept saying, missy. Never told me why he stopped me, nothing like that. Then he said, well, you sound like you're some kind of preacher. Open segue, Jesus, right? I said, yes, sir, I am. I said, I just came from Macon from the medical center where my friend who had a brain tumor, we just found out that she's gonna live. And I said, yes, sir, I am happy. And I thank God for that. So he goes back, he comes back, he hands me my license, and he says, have a nice day. My second instance, right here in Covington, is I went over, my mother was visiting a friend of hers on Deering Street. So I go down Conyers Street, go to pick her up. She needed to go to the bank. And I was driving a little BMW with a Emory plate. And so the guy, you know, here I am turning left in front of him. He's at a stop sign. I'm at a stop sign. I'm turning left. So who has the right of way? He does. He motions for me to turn left. So I said, getting ready to get stopped. So I turn left in front of him. Lights come on again, comes up, same thing, Georgia State Patrol. So I'm still wondering why he stops me. I'm in a white neighborhood, that's why he stopped me, right? So he said, may I see your license registration? Do you work at Emory? This is like 5 years apart. But because it's Emory, mostly white, do you work there? No, sir, that's where I went to school. So then he says, oh, I couldn't see your tag and your expiration because you had an AKA frame on top of it. But now imagine me being in front of him, so he couldn't see the rear in the beginning anyway. He made up something. So then he goes to the book, and he stated chapter and verse, and he said, if I can't see your whole tag and the, you know, and when it expires, you know, your little decal, technically you're, you know, you're breaking the law. And I wanted to say, so you can't ever have a frame on your car because it'll hide a little bit because each month has a different color. But I didn't say that because my mother was in the car and she's afraid. So he hands me my license back, and then I go on my way. So imagine being a young person who doesn't know and has done nothing, and you get stopped just because of the color of your skin and maybe the car that you're in. And so my third example is I was able to go with Chief Cotton, our police chief, 2 years ago, to a meaningful conference in LaGrange, Georgia, where police departments all across the country are trying to do some work. And so the person who was the assistant to Eric Holder during President Obama's administration, she was home visiting family. She was from Cobb County and a very good friend of my best friend who's an attorney. She said they'd come from either a funeral or visiting a relative. She's getting ready to head back to the house. She sees her nephew pulled over, and she's like, well, I wasn't going to stop because I got my federal badge. You know, I'm the Deputy U.S. Attorney General, so everything will be all right because he's done nothing. We just left where we were. Hour later, her nephew comes in crying. They strip searched him because they said, how'd you get a car like this? And he said, I didn't do anything wrong. So we have to, number one, make sure that as we talk to our young people, our law enforcement officials, our elected officials, number one, they have to believe that it's real, that we still have people who are behind a badge who stop people because of the color of their skin. And we know we're not just talking George Floyd. There have been things here and throughout history You know, we went with Oxford College students this past Saturday to Montgomery to the lynching memorial. That's the second time I've been this year. And to see stories and to hear stories, and some happen right here in Covington, Newton County. And to see a box that has the name of a man from Newton County from 1889 who they recorded as being lynched. And then in 1946, 2 couples were shot to death because, you know, the Malcolms and the Dorseys. So we have a history of atrocities being committed against us because of the color of our skin. And so you got a right to be mad. But then you look at Jesus, he should have been, but then he lets the law of love rule, and he says, well, I still want them to, you know, stop being knuckleheads and racists, and I want them to be saved. And that's hard to understand until you just try to keep on practicing what Jesus taught and what he teaches. And that's what inspires me. But yes, I get despondent sometimes when I see the mistreatment. You know, some of our students even in Putnam County, you know, they tell me this week that they can't take AP classes because they're recommended to go to technical school and they want to be a surgeon. They don't have medical schools, you know, being a technician. And they're told, well, you should just take this because you don't want to be in debt. You can get scholarships because of your averages. So our children are being discouraged. They're all excited about high school, and they get to some places and they're being discouraged. So we have to continue encouraging them, find good partners in the community, and then just keep on building and teaching others that it's real, prejudice is real, and so is racism. And so that's why I get up every day. If you had told me years ago that I would answer the call, I would say, you know, nope, not me. So I took all these classes, even when I was in college, philosophy and religion. Didn't realize the calling was always there. It's just when you choose to answer. So I didn't answer my calling to active ministry until 2002. By then I had a certificate in theology, and our AKA Soros, Dr. Melba Costin, asked me, why are you doing a certificate program and you need to be doing a Master of Divinity? And I said, no, that's for preachers. And so I was headed to Florida to a football game to see my cousin Dante Culpepper play in Tampa, and I go down to Reverend Benner's sister's house, walk in the door, and she's, first thing, even before she said, hello, Avis, when you gonna answer your calling? I said, I don't have one, right? So I came back home, talked to Reverend Benton, who was our then pastor, in November, well actually the end of October of 2002, and he was busy writing. It was Bible class, and I said, Reverend, we need to have the meeting. So he didn't hear, he kept on writing, and I said, Reverend, we need to have the meeting. He said, oh, the meeting. So we scheduled a time to sit. He asked me what we needed to talk about, and I told him I felt that God had called me into active ministry. Then it felt like bricks fell off my shoulder. So in the Baptist faith, you know, you don't have to go to seminary or anything. So I preached my first public sermon February 8th, 2003, on a Saturday, so family could come and visit, and then they could travel back home on Sunday. And again, I wanted to learn and do more, so I applied and got into Candler School of Theology at Emory. Started there the fall semester of 2005, got my master's. And then I left and was still working and doing things. Started a church in that time. A church, we used to meet on Sunday evenings, and we used New Hope as our, because Pastor Miller just gave me the keys, and you know, anybody who wanted to just came by, and we were trying to help get people out of prison, and had a young man who was still working on his case to try to get him out of prison. He's been there for 14 years now. And so that's the kind of ministry, just outreach kind of things. And some of the resistance with some of the old guard who haven't been educated, who don't read the word, say, you know, God ain't called a woman. But yet, if you say God can't call somebody, then you just limited God's power. And then in the same breath, they preach that God is all powerful. And then they argue. And then, you know, and I don't want to discuss minute details of, well, you know, you really should read the text and go back, and King James is only since 1611. Was there a Bible before then? Yes, certainly. You should read it sometimes, right? So you go to churches where they tell you, well, we don't acknowledge or accept or receive women ministers. I don't go there very often. And I know where they are, right? One time I went to one where, the usher says, Reverend, I'm sorry, but the pastor doesn't believe in women ministers. And it was somebody's funeral, and Reverend Benton was actually doing the eulogy. So myself and Pastor Nash, who also was a pastor at Flat Rock Baptist, she's retired now, Pastor Annette Nash, we were going to sit out, because that's not my church. I wasn't going to fight them. Reverend Benton announced to the pastor, he said, these are on the program, the order of worship, the family has written this, and if they're not a part of it, I'm not either. This is the family's request. Yes, sir, Reverend Benton. And so we sat in the pulpit. But I tell them all, y'all got to take it up with Jesus. I have to answer my calling, and so my day is full of answering what I've been called to do, so I'm not going to argue with people who weren't there, who didn't hear it. And he called me, he didn't call them, and I don't really get into those kind of serious discussions with them because I got too much work to do. Service, just trying to do what I can to help folks, and whoever calls, whether it's probably one of the most humbling things that I can talk about is a gentleman who has passed away. Reverend Bennett said he needed to meet me, and he was actually from Boston. And at that time, he was almost 70 years old, and I met him, and I was like, hey, I called his name. I said, what can I do to help you? And he said, I want you to teach me how to read. He said, I would like to be able to read the Bible. He said, my wife doesn't. He said, I had a supervisor's job. He said, but I was just quick to learn to see what I needed to do. And he said, plus, I want to tell my sons that I know how to read. And so I then, I pulled out some primary and elementary stuff, and then we started writing in pencil. And then that day when he was able to write his son a postcard, and he said, I'm writing this, and I finally learned how to read. So I just try to do what I can, when I can. That motivates me, especially to help children realize that their dreams can be achieved with hard work, with discipline, and respect your elders, and love everybody. So if I have done some of that as I have been sprinkled across this community, then the living, the work, I figure I got lots more stuff to do, and I'm happy, joyous, excited, humbled about what's in front of me and what else God has for me next. So my favorite Bible verse is John 15:13. Greater love hath no man, no person than this, that a man will lay down his life for his friends. So when you see everybody as a child of God, a brother or sister, our Newton County has so much opportunity. We have, great leadership. We have doors that have been opened, and it's a great place to be from, because that's where I came from, right? But it's a great place to be from, but it's also a great place to work, and to work in the vineyard. And, harvest time is coming. Laborers are few. There's a lot more work to be done. We got to clean up neighborhoods. We've got to help young people realize that nothing wrong with hard work. You don't work, you don't eat. And I work in an area at Lake Oconee where we have such a generous population of rich white people at Lake Oconee, a lot of them, first generation millionaires who don't mind helping anybody do anything, from a food drive to doing homes. I got to speak to the Men of Lake Oconee group this past Tuesday, where they have 185 men that have done $200,000 worth of work in some of the poorest sections that you will see in this entire country. There's still people with no running water. There's still people who, when I see their homes, it brings tears to my eyes. And until we can start doing something to encourage a great metamorphosis and transformation across the whole landscape of the community, where those who don't have will have more and have more opportunity, then we still have a lot of work to do. So let's keep working.